Now presenting CEO Tim Gallagher for Royalties Incorporated.
Hello there, and thanks for coming and joining us today. We are describing two companies. One is a private company called Music Royalties Inc. that we started 7 years ago, and it's really on the back of the public company model in mining royalties, gold royalties in particular. So this is really actually our third royalty company. We were on the ground floor with Metalla back in 2016. 2017, we learned about music royalties, and ultimately we're trying to merge this public company, Royalties Inc., with the cash flow that music royalties is generated. So switch to the next slide. Where's the arrow? Okay, so Royalties Inc. was actually birthed in 2008 as Xtierra Inc. and a silver company, a silver property in Mexico. And it still has that silver property. And of course, as anybody who follows the mining business realizes, it's been pretty tough sledding for silver companies. So we changed the name to Royalties Inc. in 2022 and put in $1 million worth of our private company, Music Royalties Inc. And the idea, of course, is that the Royalties Inc. public company is a way for non-accredited investors to participate in the dividends that music royalties has generated. So in the 7 years, we've raised $30 million for Music Royalties Inc. We bought 30 catalogs, some amazing global artists, Rolling Stones, Who, Kinks. Now, these are pieces of those songs and bands from the point of view of songwriters, producers, managers, and it's a whole ecosystem that's not in the public company or the public world yet. You've probably heard of some of the private funds that are out there that have been buying much bigger size deals, $100 million, $200, $500 million deals in the case of Bruce Springsteen. So in the case of the public company, which is literally a 4-cent stock, we're trying to monetize these two mining situations we have. If we can sell the silver asset, if we can get joy on the lawsuit on the copper silver royalty with Capstone, then we'd have a pool of capital to replicate the music royalties story. So that's a little bit convoluted, but at the end of the day, we're just trying to get into the same position with the public company as the success we've had with the private company. And Music Royalties has paid out $11 million in dividends so far. We have 350 shareholders. We pay a monthly dividend, in terms of EFTs, quarterly for U.S. shareholders and international, just because it's easier and we avoid, the wire fees. So, next page. So we're going to say the same story several different ways, but let's start with the silver asset, because that is the legacy asset. In the history of silver production, Peru, going back 500 years, and Mexico, were the exciting places to be. So we're in this amazing state of Zacatecas. We have this Bilbao asset 50 kilometers east of Zacatecas City. We have the next biggest mine being developed 18 kilometers east of us with Agnico Eagle and Teck. But in simple terms, it's the equivalent of 20 million ounces of silver at $30. Today's prices, round figures, it's about $600 million worth of silver, zinc, lead in the ground. Now, if you're following silver and you've watched both gold and silver go up 50% over the last year or so, with a long way to go, we personally think that it's in the stagflation era and probably will double again before the end of the decade. So there's a lot of upside, and if you do the math on our property, then you're basically saying that we'll have $1 billion worth of in situ value for somebody who wants to take it forward into production. But our purposes are to replicate the music royalties model. So if we can sell it for $2 or $3 million even, US dollars, and go out and buy some cash flow that we can use for dividends and buying assets and share buybacks, then that's how we turn our 4-cent, share price into something that's, double or triple of that. In fact, even in the little mini silver market of 2021, the stock got to 20 cents, when the Reddit investors were after the silver price, because there's not that many silver stories that are out there. So that's this sort of silver optionality aspect of it. The lottery ticket capstone lawsuit is related to, in simple terms, them trying to buy the claims that the person we did a deal with, who had the 2% NSR, and transferring it to themselves, for no consideration and without notifying the owner. So we filed a civil and criminal lawsuit back in 2021. We've been going through this process, and the final arguments have been submitted, and we think it's worth up to $25 million US. So of course, that's at a scale where, using our multiple for music royalties cash flow, we could buy another, let's call it $3 or $4 million in cash flow and take us to a whole other level, matching music royalties, and in that sense, replicating, in many ways, some of the successful gold royalty companies. I think I skipped that part. If you go back to the beginning of the Franco-Nevada, Silver Wheaton, Royal Gold stories, they were very tiny companies. They were shell companies. They went from 2 million market cap valuations to 40 billion. So we're just trying to do that with a different, more exciting asset class, more diversified, tied to the internet, and most importantly, it's the 100-year copyright law that makes it interesting. So mine life typically is 10 or 15 years, and if you said, okay, how many people in the room here own intellectual property, protected by law around the world, the answer is obviously nobody owns this asset class. All the hit songs, right? All the brands, and so we've been able to buy pieces of Rolling Stones, Who, Kinks, one-hit wonders like Dancing in the Moonlight. We did our biggest deal was with Matthew Knowles, who's Beyonce's father, and that came with about 3,000 songs. So we've got about 7,000 songs paying us streaming income, which typically is half a cent per stream, when you work it out, and then you have the percentage that you own of that. So it's highly, highly diversified, very fragmented industry. And if you think about, the city of Los Angeles, there's probably, easily 1 million rights holders there. So let's see if I've covered everything. Where's the map? Did I show that? Yeah, okay, so as far as getting into the details on the silver story, it's a whole other ecosystem, but right now silver is literally the cheapest, most undervalued asset on the planet. And it's sort of a small market. It's been in deficit for 5 years, but the ratio of gold to silver has stretched to 100 to 1, which is crazy. So first of all, gold has gone from $250 back in the last technology crash, the dot-com, it was $250 an ounce. So this, in quotes, mini tech crash is aligned if you think about how silver a couple days ago was, $3,500, right? $3,500 an ounce. So it's up 14 times from the year 2000. Silver needs to do some kind of a catch-up, and in this gold ratio chart, you can see it can get down as low as 16. I mean, in the ground, I think the ratio is 7 to 1 in terms of the Mother Nature's ratio. So there's a lot of upside in terms of the silver story, and so I know it's a eclectic mix of assets, right? One silver asset, one lawsuit lottery ticket, tied to a cash flow and an outcome, and then this very diversified, successful private company we've got. But that's on purpose, from the perspective of kind of hiding in a market that's uncertain around the world. You want to have some allocation in our minds to precious metals. You want to have an allocation to intellectual property for all the obvious reasons, being part of a global brand that has, a 100-year monopoly from copyright law. And, we're frankly at the beginning of our story. We're 4 cents per share, symbol RI on the CSE and ROYIF, on the OTC. So, we think we've got 10-bagger potential on the Royalties Inc. side for those reasons, and there's obviously lots of details, so ask any questions you want. But the point is, there's nobody in this conference, maybe than a few of our shareholders here, that own music royalties on a diversified basis getting a monthly dividend, and we want to share that idea. And you can execute it personally because there's lots of, rights holders that are out there. I think there's probably, at least 3 million rights holders in the US, for example, right? But You got to connect with them and you got to say, what do you think, what they've got? Is it interesting? And at the end of the day, if it's an anthem song, a trophy property, or, a hit TV show or a movie, then you probably want to have a piece of it. So maybe I could go to questions if anybody wants to dig into the details on the logic behind the lawsuit. We can go through the map. Or if you want to cover music royalties. Questions? The purpose of, go ahead.
Well, okay, so I guess like the asset number 2 is kind of the inflection point, right? So I just like to possibly dig a little bit deeper. So you see all the arguments are done, so the lawyers are all done. It's literally up to the judge now for that ruling. Is that where it's at?
Yeah.
And if so, give you a ballpark number for how long next the judges take the right.
Yeah, no, so I mean, obviously, it's every legal process is different. So we've been very lucky because of the fellow that we did the deal to buy into this interest. He's worked it in the 90s. That's why the whole thing's so nefarious, because it's very laid out in terms of how it got set up in 2002. Capstone came out, but he connected with these litigators, and because it's kind of a smaller community, the lead litigator is actually the attorney general for the state. So, because they have this sort of election process for, their judge and stuff. And he happens to have gone to law school with the judge. But on your first question, having done all the paperwork, the depositions, we even had, a site visit, legal process. We were waiting on independent assessments of the production. The punchline is, it was only a couple of weeks ago that they filed the final arguments, and that sets the clock running for the judge to basically respond within 20 working days, which is essentially a month. And Capstone could surely appeal it, but we have a secondary strategy, because this is obviously mined and management in Vancouver, to go after the people in Vancouver. And there's a bunch of details related to that. But Capstone's evolved over the last 5 years since we did the deal, to a whole new management team and these world-class Chilean assets. So the new directors and the new management basically don't even know anything about this lawsuit. It was all executed by the former management. So we just trying to get in front of them, and if we have to also file a suit in Vancouver to get them going, because they're paying right here. So this is the old mine across the top, and then they expanded down this way on this Malinocha footwall zone. These people here, a year and a half ago, there's a public gold royalty company that paid $7.5 million for those 2 claims that are now generating 1.3 million US, up from 750,000 run rate. So it's kind of a 10 times cash flow multiple. So we're 2%, so twice the percentage. We're more than twice the land in terms of the claims, and they went through our property, if you will. They're mining our property, or the property that we have the royalty on, to get to the secondary one. So it's really just about saying, look, do the right thing and just start paying. But only in the last couple of weeks, I finally went back on the old 43-101, the detailed engineering stuff that goes back to 2010, 2014, and I found out that they actually admit in these lines that they've been producing since 2010, and they put the tonnage in these, and they have these maps that show as they came down the footwall zone. So I want to present all that stuff, as best I can to anybody who wants to listen, in order to, get resolution and settlement on this thing. So it's an odd situation, but I suppose, if you're paying attention to the litigation situations that are in the market, there's actually a fair number of companies that are, got lawsuits out there waiting for settlements, and a few of them have had, success. So, we just happen to be one of them. And, we obviously can't say it's money in the bank yet, but it's a compelling case. Essentially, the fellow that our partner sold those 5 claims to had a check of like $1.7 million, being wagged in front of his face, saying, we want your land because we need to expand. We want those 5 claims, but we don't want to pay a royalty. And they just colluded together to, in quotes, transfer the assignment of that royalty from Minera Portry, which is the name of our subsidiary, to themselves. So we're just trying to invalidate that transfer and then go after the collection and the settlement. So, $25 million is what we're putting the value on it based on, even just the linear comparison to the neighbors that are down strike. So, and as I said, because of the proof of our success of buying cash flow in this infinite world of music and entertainment royalties, we know whatever amount of cash we can get, we can essentially buy 10, 12, 15% yields. Sometimes they can be 20% yields, and sometimes, or 5 times cash flow, but sometimes they grow into that. And so when I put the Avicii example on your desk, I'm basically saying this is live proof of something we've owned for 7 years. We paid $145,000 for it. Started off as a 10% yield, which was nice when rates were 0, and it's grown to a 25% yield, which is just remarkable. So we've received all of our capital back, and we've got 100+ years to go. So anybody as an individual or as a company would say, or a family office would think that's a pretty cool thing to own, because it's got nothing to do with, public markets and wars and tariffs at all, right? In fact, the big picture in the music royalties segment is Spotify alone last year paid out $10 billion to rights holders. And nobody really digests the magnitude of those numbers. Spotify and YouTube, which I call the new record stores since they came on the scene 20 years ago, they paid out $100 billion to rights holders. So everybody has this image that it's small, but it's not. It's massive. And if you think about YouTubers like the little kid getting $30 million, it's big money. So you want to have something, though, that's going to be an anthem song, a trophy property that'll be around, for decades. And that's the remarkable thing. So I don't know of any business that's as exciting as, whatever allocation you want to make, as having a piece of, a hit brand. And so having Avicii grow from 300 million plays just on Spotify in the last 7 years to 2 billion and he died right after we bought it. So it's not like he's out marketing and telling the story. It's just natural growth from the work that he did up to the point that he died. He went around the world 800 times, and it's a great song. And so it's on lots of playlists. And so 24/7, you're getting this little bit of streaming income rent, from Avicii, the Knights. Any other questions? So so go ahead, Joanne.
Just really sharing how it's also a technology investment, really, like streaming,
No.
upward trajectory, music, all that.
Yeah, you've got that. Well, no, I don't say a statement, but yeah, I think I appreciate the point. So if you go back to when we started, and even in this room, if I said, how many people had subscription revenue or subscriptions or were doing streaming 6 or 7 years ago, the answer would mostly be none. So the curve that we've been riding, you can see it on our booth, but the music industry more or less did nothing between 2000 after Napster showed up, and it struggled for a long period of time, switching from CDs and that 99-cent download. And then you wake up around, 2015 or so, and there's 50 million music subscribers. I mean, Apple didn't even have their offering yet. When we got going, there was 100 million music subscribers, and if whatever number you want to put on it, say it's $100 or $200 a year, because once you sign up for the subscriptions, it basically becomes till you're gone, right? It's every year, it's just a utility bill. So the transition from that business complements of technology is really what's happened. And obviously, it's going to turn into 1 billion people with subscriptions to music, but in numbers terms, there's 20 billion in cash flow, streaming cash flow, call it, every year. I think there's also another 20 billion in TV, movies, book royalties. There's all these things that are interesting, but I'm showing the chart. But this is really what's happened, right? Over time. This is picking it up in 2017. Uh-oh, you could just kick it off. No. Okay. Anyway, it is a tech story. So the digitization of music, the transformation is totally because of the big platforms, right? Facebook's now paying, TikTok shows up. As I said, the two big ones are still Spotify and YouTube, but Apple, there's 1,000 payers that are out there. Sound Exchange, Sirius Satellite, So it's all digital income, and it's tracked, on a global basis. So it's not like you've got customers just in the U.S. Okay, even though traditionally, half the revenue for music come from the U.S. But if you could get a piece of Bollywood, a piece of K-pop, then that's the idea of reevaluating the stock potential. Because if we get something related to Bollywood and $1 billion for Indians appreciate that, or something in Indonesia or K-pop, any category. So that's the diversification, that's the global appeal. So it's sort of an infinite story, infinite platform called the internet. Any other questions? So it's embryonic, but I think we're at our floor at 4 cents a share. So if anything, these things start coming to pass, we just signed up for BTC eligibility through Glendale. Made it easier for U.S. investors to get on board. And it's really just the kind of thing that once we get that music royalty story into the Royalties Inc. version, then that's the catalyst for forever increased dividends and increase in stock compounding that has nothing to do with the economy. Don, I want to share some other stuff.
Well, I was going to just show BMI quarterly statement.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes people think it's a mystery as far as how you get paid, but this is, I guess, an example of broadcast music Inc. In fact, that was a really good discovery. We were doing mining, and I saw in the Toronto newspaper, BMI in the U.S. pays out a record $1 billion in royalties, and the next thing, now they're up to 1.7 billion, and the ecosystem's growing. So, ASCAP also is paying a similar amount. So it's just these performing rights organizations, PROs around the world. The one in Canada called SOCAN pays out $500 million a year. And the other G7 countries like the UK, Germany, France, they're each paying with them. So you're really just, again, making a deal with the rights holder, whether it's a neighbor, whether you want to be part of a portfolio. Wholly passive. This is just the details. When you break it down, it's, as you would expect, did you get your check from this country, or the 200 checks from the 200 countries, from Spotify, from YouTube, from Apple, from TikTok. It's all being tracked, right? And then if there's, the only thing we didn't talk about in detail is the syncs. If something gets shown in a movie or a commercial, you can kind of get bonus money. So we've seen amazing things happen with our Dancing in the Moonlight, which is truly a one-hit wonder. 1973 song from a band called King Harvest. The song was redone by Top Loader in 1998 in Next Generation. But if you've seen the ad, it was an ad on CBS where they, I guess the CEO liked the song and he wanted it to be at the end of the commercial, but it's a $400,000 bonus payment, which is crazy, amazing. So
I just say the moral of the story is when you own the rights to a song, wherever that song gets played and whenever it gets played, you receive a payment. So I would say common misconceptions are TikTok doesn't pay or Facebook doesn't pay. They all pay. They all show up on the statement. And I'm just showing you here that each subscription pays slightly differently. So the Apple family pays differently than the Apple individual versus the Apple student subscription. But they've literally, it's all tracked and it's all courtesy of the FANG stocks that most of the money comes from. But just to even just show you here, I can type in TikTok on the statement, boom. So it's all tracked.
And so you wouldn't think, going back to my point, that Netflix is contributed in music, well, you don't think about that in terms of movies, but we've just learned over time that call it 10% of the movie budget is actually allocated to music licensing. So they're remarkable numbers. And someone says, I need to have that song that defines the movie. So in fact, sometimes the soundtrack is the movie. So, every scene in Netflix, which is bigger than Hollywood, has got music in the background. So it's all that new money. So we're down to our last minute. So any other questions, you can come see us at the booth. But recapping, it's really just taking the successful mining royalty business, and there's 50 or 100 companies that are out there, but just using that model and bringing a new asset class that has a longer mine life as in copyright law to the public markets. Thanks for your attention.